I guess I can start. Good afternoon and very welcome to this session. I'm extremely pleased to see a packed room, which means that the subject is interesting and able of attracting you after the networking that you had over lunch. So thank you so much for joining us. We are going to discuss future-proof European Energy Union governance. And for that, we are joined here today by an incredible panel. All 6 speakers have proven experience in governance aspects and also have ideas and thoughts to share with us. So I think we'll have a very, very good discussion here. But time is short. We have 1 hour and a half with 6 speakers. So I promise to do a very quick introduction. This session, we are going to look at issues like how can we ensure that the energy and climate governance is future-proof in a rapidly changing world. And I think you understand why we are bringing this subject, because we have seen that it has been challenging for the governance regulation to be adapted over these last years, these last 5 years, to the reality on the ground. And also, how can we translate plans, reports and assessments into concrete action and investments on the ground? So perhaps a few things to set the scene. Firstly, as most of you, I guess, know, back in 2018, the Commission, the EU agreed on a governance regulation, and that establishes a framework to implement strategies and measures to meet the objectives and targets of the Energy Union and the long-term Union greenhouse gas emissions commitments, and this towards the climate neutrality by 2050. It also aims at stimulating cooperation between the member states in an internal energy market, to ensure timely, transparent and comparable climate and energy reporting, so really the transparency and oversight here, and also to contribute to greater regulatory certainty, giving the perspective to investors, so bringing greater investor certainty. In these 5.5 years of implementation, many actions have been put in place. Perhaps the most well-known are the national energy and climate plans. But also, we put in place, based on the governance, interesting mechanisms to help member states to get to the targets, like, for instance, the renewable energy financing mechanism. And we also have made important steps in the reporting by the member states, facilitating their task with the creation of an e-platform. Just to remind everyone that the governance regulation and the plans and reporting cover all 5 dimensions of the Energy Union. We tend to look at only renewables and energy efficiency, but it's far more than that. So it's the whole spectrum, let's say, of the energy. I would like perhaps just to look a bit closer to the NECPs, the National Energy and Climate Plans. We see that these have offered important guidance for key reforms and investments under, for instance, the European semester, the post-COVID-19 recovery and resilience plans, as well as for the regional and structural funds. So these plans were a good basis for this sequential work. And they continue, their continued relevance, I think, is quite clear. We are, as you know, in the process, together with member states, of updating the national energy and climate plans. We have an important deadline coming end of this month, end of June. Member states have to send to the Commission their final NECPs, final updated NECPs that should incorporate the recommendations, taking into account our assessment delivered on their draft plan. So an important deadline for us. And once this is done, we will assess those, and hopefully member states will vigorously start implementing these plans. My third point, before passing the floor in presenting to you the panel, as I said at the beginning, we are facing fundamental changes, new priorities for energy systems that need to be reflected in the governance mechanisms so that the strategic planning and reporting do not remain on paper, but lead really to tangible action, concrete results, and deeper insights in the achievements and challenges of energy and climate policies. Here also our engagement with the civil society and local and regional authorities is important and no doubt will need to be stepped up. We will soon publish a review report, evaluation report on the implementation of the governance regulation. This should come over the next month. And so this session is also for us important in that sense because we will be looking also backwards, what has worked well, what was worked perhaps less well, and can further help us in this evaluation. And with this short introduction, I would like now to pass to the panel, and I will introduce one by one. And give them the floor. So perhaps I would like to start with Mr. Klisovic. Sorry for the bad pronunciation. So you are president of the City Assembly of Zagreb and member of the European Committee of the Regions. We know you very well from the Committee of the Regions, not only because you have been the rapporteur of the opinion on the multi-level Green Deal governance, and you're also very much familiar with the national and the EU processes, as you have been a former diplomat and a member of the Croatian Parliament and the European Parliament. So you have all these perspectives together, which is really good. So if I may, I would like to ask you, in your view, has the governance regulation helped local and regional authorities to contribute to climate and energy policies? And in that case, how this has happened? Please, if you could give your reply in 5 minutes, I would really appreciate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, the short answer is yes, they have helped, but not to the extent we were hoping for. And this is the addition. Governance regulations really created a solid legal framework for all of us. They integrated for the first time climate policy and energy policy, which is very, very important. And they created the new obligations for governments, which is as well very important for us at the local level, because we are, at the very end of the chain for implementation. They created a new environment for private stakeholders and for us at the local level, much more conducive environment, much more engaging environment, and that is very important. So I will say we are better off with them comparing to the times where we didn't. But we can do better. And the first thing is we should be really credible. How we check our credibility by implementation. So the governance rules related to implementation and monitoring of implementation should be stricter. We know, all of us, that we can't really organize a multi-level dialogue for the governments. We can't really mandate them how to do that. I mean, they will do it. But what we can do is to set minimum criteria for meaningful multi-level dialogue. So we want to avoid situation that the whole dialogue is just pro forma, just window dressing. And in Committee of the Regions, we did a study, just trying to see what is the quality of these dialogues. And we found diversity was huge. Some of them were really constructive, while the others were just pro forma, as I say, window dressing. So this is the first thing. Implementation should be monitored more strictly. The second thing is cities are very often more ambitious than their governments, national governments, member states' governments. And legislator, European Parliament and the Council, should they take into consideration what has been already done by cities in different arrangements, like Covenant of Mayors or missions on neutrality or climate adaptation. So we did a lot. We set even higher targets than what we have in the Green Deal. And big cities in particular, which have enough resources, skillful personnel, their work should be recognized and be, recognized by legislators. So this is very important for us. Then the third thing is we should move from paper to action. I mean, a green transition, energy transition, climate change should not be just targets and policies on the paper. So we should be more concrete in the implementation phase. How? NECPs should have, to my mind, a special implementation chapter where governments will commit resources to local and regional authorities, which implement 80% of the Green Deal in total, in accordance with the estimation of OECD. So which sometimes not all of the regions and cities have enough resources to implement. And then we need to beg, which is not very pleasant, and usually you are refused. But if you have a special implementation chapter in NECP, then we can say, look, this is something government has committed to, and it should deliver. If you want us, local and regional authorities, to deliver, then you should do your part of the job. And then the fourth thing, which is very important, cohesion, synergy among the policies. I mentioned governance regulations already made a synergy between climate policy and energy policy, but this is it. What about the rest of the policies? You mentioned greening or greening of economic semester, European semester, which is very important because governments take very, very seriously European semester, all the recommendations which the Commission puts into the European semester. So greening European semester is a must for us. Aligning economic policies with energy policies and climate policies is a must. We need that kind of synergy. Otherwise, when we implement each of the policy on the ground in our local in cities, then we have conflicting, requirements, and then you are confused what to do. Are you going to implement, energy policy or climate policy, or you are going to implement economic policy? If they are not aligned, reconciled among themselves, then we have a huge problem at the ground. And that's, in conclusion, one of my main recommendations is that cities and regions should be involved upfront in defining climate and energy policy, because we can bring to the table the arguments which are necessary, which are crucial for implementation. We can say, look, if you want these policies to be implemented, we need this, this, and that. If we don't get it, forget implementation. And then the whole thing is not credible. These are just words, not deeds. They're not followed by action. Thank you. Was that within the 5 minutes?
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. And before I just briefly comment on your intervention, I would like to recall everyone that you can post your questions or statements in, and use the slide, okay? You have there the link, so please don't hesitate. Thank you so much for the ideas you have brought, your experience. And there is one of those that I would like to underline here because it's also what we have been telling the member states. With these plans, but also the reports, this is an exercise of credibility for the member states, okay? Because this is a proof on how serious a member state is in implementing the legislation that has been agreed in co-decision with the European Parliament. So it's a credibility exercise for the member states, for the EU as a whole. And thank you very much for the ideas that you have put forward that we will follow up. Thank you so much. And moving forward with the panel, I would like now to move to the member states' experiences on the development and implementation of the national energy and climate plans, and also of monitoring the progress. And here, perhaps I would start with Mr. Martin Verdonk, who is a senior advisor at the Netherlands Enterprise Agency and has a long experience in advising the Dutch government on the national and European energy and climate policies. And if I understood correctly, you are currently coordinating the national climate and energy reports in the Netherlands. Could you tell us, based on your experience, how the Dutch have indeed experienced the energy union governance, and what are your experiences with developing and implementing the NECPs and on the reporting progress? So what can you tell us from that experience that you have faced firsthand? Thank you. Again, 5 minutes, if you don't mind.
Okay, try to do that. Interrupt if I don't. Thank you, Paula. My name is Martijn Verdonk. I'm just to correct a bit. I'm not entirely responsible for the entire NECP. I'm just responsible for the analytical part of it. But I was already involved at the very beginning, at the very first draft NECP in 1918. Well, the Netherlands is currently finalizing the update of the NECP, and we're planning to submit it this June. And well, to put it bluntly, to give a blunt answer to your question, the NECP has limited added value for us and for member states which have already strong national policies and governance systems in place. Netherlands had climate policies for starting in 1990s. Some of them are still in place and have been evolved over time. And actually, the mark in climate policy for us was really the energy agreement in 2013 already. And what was good about it is that it set not only just policies for all kinds of sectors, but also, well, the basis for the governance system we currently have. So that involved by then a committee which was overseeing the implementation, but also having tools for that. So there was projections made annually which evaluated on a yearly basis the new policy proposals and estimated the impact of that. And well, and if it's not good enough, then this committee would say, hey, you have to do more. And so a policy evaluation cycle was developed. And this system was institutionalized in National Climate Act 2019 and was brought in line with the EU Climate Act later on. Our main challenge was actually to combine the two. So integrating, coordinating the national process with the European process. And it was not always that easy. I mean, as you know, national budget and parliamentary processes are very difficult to just change. And you can also say that for European processes. So as you can imagine, yeah, that was challenging for us sometimes. But I think we managed well up until now. But speaking for myself and our team, but for national policymakers, it's still difficult to grasp what is the NECP, and what doesn't help is the structuring in it. The NECP is structured along the 5 energy unions energy union dimensions, but national policies are, well, usually structured more on a sectoral along sectoral lines. So stakeholders are not always very familiar with these dimensions. But on the good side, positive side, having a different perspective on policy making, it did identify new policy areas where we did not do that much, but now we do, thanks to the NECP, like energy poverty, phasing out fossil fuel subsidies. But the main thing, I would say, the importance, also to give credits to the governance regulation, is that, and that's really important for us as a part of the EU and having an internal market, is that it creates a level playing field. And so it ensures somehow that our own national ambitions, and it somehow mirrored, reflected also at our other member states, and that gives assurance for investors, like you say, and so therefore, yeah, it's a project we engaged and assign a great deal of priority as well. Also, good sides is that it helped really to exchange experiences, best practices between policymakers. Reporting is more streamlined. It makes my life, in that sense, easy, because more easy, as I'm responsible for many of the reporting. Yeah, so it's pros and cons, and well, and then if I may, I have some recommendations, but to further improve it. I mean, for how many time do I have? Yeah, okay. So first thing I would say is reflect the revised ambitions and targets recently updated in the governance regulation, and not all targets are in there or are not up to date anymore. But maybe that's important for investors, obviously. But what I'm thinking is that and it relates also what I mentioned to the structure of the NECP, that we could try to enhance its comparability and transparency. But I mean, let's say you're an investor and you want to dive into the EU market, and you don't want to just go to one member state, but several at a time. Okay, then you have 27 NECPs to read through, which on average a couple of 100 pages, and without annexes. So yeah, that's still a tough job, and it's just a PDF. There's no, yeah, it's very hard to grasp what's in there, and so therefore I think do something about the transparency, and allow for a sectoral approach. Within a sector, multiple policies are there, so you can have a better understanding for the whole sector you want to operate in. But also do something with the data in it, and to make it more easy. Oh, I want to know what's the industrial policy in this and this and this member state, and just click, and there it is. And two other points is to have the long-term strategy better integrated. I think that's also very important for investors, I would say, especially energy projects, capital-intensive projects require long times to have a profit. So the current SSPs have a time of 10 years, so and we're just lagging behind with the current one. So yeah. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We still have a second round, and you can continue afterwards.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes. So thank you very much. I mean, it did not take my surprise your remark that for certain member states, including the Netherlands, you have their own national planning plans and systems. This is, I think, across the member states. Some have more experience or stronger or more years of experience of doing that, but most of have, and we face also that challenge that we see that some member states struggle, not the least with the timing of these different exercises between the national agenda and the European agenda. This is something that, I mean, if someone has a good solution for that, please come forward. Nevertheless, I also appreciate the fact that you consider the usefulness of the NECPs, a standardized way to present the plans, and see across the member states how all the policy and legislative work is reflected in concrete action and funding. So I think it's important. You mentioned transparency. I would also, and comparison between member states. I'll also add an important element here, which is experience learning and learning from others, because we see that a lot. The member states are checking other plans to get some form of inspiration. We saw that in the various meetings we had with member states. Thank you so much, and I'll move forward. And now I would like to call in Mrs. Julien Lurin Eriksson, from the European Environment Agency. No, sorry. From the Danish Ministry, because the name was not connected to the Danish Ministry for Climate, Energy and Utilities. Could you please tell us, from the Danish perspective, what has been the experience at national level on developing and implementing the NECP, and also the impact that you perceive that it has had on the energy and climate policy, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I would say I actually agree with a lot of the points that the Netherlands already raised. In Denmark, we mainly use the NECP as a reporting tool rather than to steer policies. So it's good for providing a clear overview for European stakeholders. They can access our policies and data and take a look at our national contributions. We don't use it as much in a national policy context. And this is, of course, a national choice, because Denmark already has several reporting obligations at the national level that we base the NECP off on. So we have these like annual projections, we have stock takes to ensure that we are on the right track, both to reach our national goals, but also the EU goals. And these are required in our national climate law. So I think we might have some work to do in terms of integrating those two things, but I will say that's just an added layer on many topics. That being said, we do believe that having a strong governance framework is key to achieve our common targets, and especially to mitigate the risk of not reaching the joint targets, or in case a member state is not on the right trajectory to fulfill their contributions. So by having this joint framework, we do ensure that we all speak the same language and we all report in a somewhat similar manner. But on our side, we would like to see a governance framework that go beyond 2030. The path towards 2030, we believe that's already been laid out, and we should focus on implementing that and keep the traction. But from our side, we would like to see what do we do after 2030, and we also have some themes that we believe are key to have to secure the future of the energy union, essentially. And that does include a clear framework for sanctioning and for maybe less administrative burden in terms of reporting, but also to take a look at all the sub-targets in the regulation, take stock and see what we can do to become even better. So there are three themes that I would just like to highlight that we would like to focus on policy-wise. First, we believe there is a need to incentivize for a clear both direct and indirect electrification and system integration, and somehow provide incentives to include more flexibility so we can integrate all the renewables, and also ensure there is an optimal use of the existing capacity. The second one is that we should focus on the implementation side, as has already been said. How do we realize the targets? How do we go beyond 2030? We see there is a need to adjust legislation to make it more fit to cooperate across borders, especially in terms of these large-scale renewable projects and investments, particularly offshore. I think it's the Germans who have talked about cooperation targets. I think that would be interesting to explore a bit further, but also just to ensure monitoring, compliance, incentives, and also sanctioning, really, to ensure that we are all on the right trajectory. We can't really go around that. And thirdly, large-scale projects such as building out renewables, reaching our targets, infrastructure, we believe this has to be approached from a more regional and European perspective, so we can realize the joint ambitions. And I think this will also be key in future governance, because planning and coordination in this area, also past the 10 years, is something that will be key to realize our targets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie, for your remarks and for your ideas on future development of the governance regulation. We take those on board. We are not yet at the stage of revising the governance regulation. One may expect that to happen in the next during the next Commission mandate, but we have to wait for them to come and start working, and after that we will know where we stand on this issue. But in any event, all these ideas are very interesting, and we will explore further with this. Also, thank you for your remarks on your experience in Denmark when it comes to the NECPs and how you use them. And let me move now to the European Environment Agency. Sorry for my mistake before. And here I'd like to ask Mr. William Killing. You coordinate the European Environment Agency share of the implementation of the governance regulations, so mostly linked to the climate parts, not so much on the energy part. So we would like to hear from you, and in particular, what progress can we see towards the EU level targets, and what challenges you find that there is still in monitoring and assessing the member states' progress. So from your point of view, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So my name is William Keeling from the European Environment Agency, indeed coordinating the government's governance regulation implementation from our side, which is a lot of the monitoring and reporting and the quality checking thereof. Indeed, we're focused mostly on the climate aspect, but a little bit of energy reporting, particularly now focused on the policies and measures reporting going on, and some other additional reporting. I think it's been mentioned by a lot of the other speakers that I think first off to say the integrated governance framework of climate and energy is really key, and I think it's very important that we've gone in this direction. When you look at it from a pure data perspective, over 3/4 of EU emissions come from energy, so it's a no-brainer that this should be an integrated approach. But on top of this, we have all the other dimensions that Paolo mentioned that shouldn't be forgotten, not just the other dimensions such as energy security, but the big discussion of implementation and investment. I think also the social aspect of just transition. These are all aspects we need to kind of push together in one integrated framework. So I think that's very key. And what the governance framework can achieve for us is giving a clear structure and guidance on all of this to compile legal targets, set up monitoring processes to understand how we're progressing towards said targets, and then plan and coordinate if we're off course. And I think that's really, really key. A lot of this is already underway, as was introduced by Paolo at the beginning. And I'll dive into now a bit what we can say about progress to targets from the EEA's side. So based on a lot of the data we collect in the Trends and Projections report for 2023, which you can find on the EEA's website, we see that essentially there is a large amount of progress undertaken in the EU, but there is an increased pace of action required for us to achieve the 2030 targets. So we're going in the right direction, but it needs to speed up. So in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the annual GHG emission reduction rate must double to achieve 2030 targets. The renewable energy deployment rate needs to triple to achieve 2030 targets, and energy efficiency needs to, or energy consumption needs to decrease even faster for us to achieve our targets. It's not all doom and gloom, because we do see some rapid developments in some technologies. Solar PV development and the uptake of electric vehicles is rising very quickly. But in the end, still, broadly, we need more action. This is going to be required across essentially all sectors, but particularly in certain sectors, for example, land use change, forestry, buildings, and transport, so 3 key sectors that we highlight in this report. One thing additionally to note is that from the greenhouse gas projections that member states provide, again, it goes a bit more to we need to ramp up our efforts, because the projected data from 2023, not from the NECPs to be very clear, but from the 2023 reporting shows that only a handful of countries are actually expected to achieve 2030 greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. So again, we really need to boost efforts here. Again, with the NECPs, we had a slightly updated figure, which was closer to the targets, but still off by a couple of percentage points. And we hope with the final NECPs, we'll see that we're getting on track. But again, there is a clear sign for improvement. Regarding then the challenges for monitoring, I think, like many of the panelists, I could talk for a while on this. I think we are in a very good place, but of course there are tweaks we can make to improve the system. And of course the challenge is that the challenge we face in the depth and scope of the governance regulation and what we're trying to achieve is so broad. So it takes quite a granular monitoring framework to track the progress in a really comprehensive way. I'll try and condense this down into a few simple points. The first of which is the challenge of the greenhouse gas projections data we have. I've referenced it now a couple of times. It is a vital bottom-up data set for us. It comprises the model data from a member state level. It's been mentioned already by our member state counterparts as well. It's really a key data set for us to understand, are we on track to achieve future targets? But of course, it would be useful to have maybe a bit more detail in the EU data sets. This would be to have a more subsectoral level, both with existing measures and with additional measures for those who are familiar with the data set. But having a more subsectoral granular view would be very useful for us to understand where particularly gaps are being experienced. Additionally, I think from our side, for the decarbonisation, greenhouse gas emissions and removal component, the GHG projections is really useful, but then from the energy side, it doesn't have the full usability. This is mainly because the energy parameters section of the reporting isn't so detailed currently by member state reporting. And we see that there would be a huge improvement in having detailed energy parameters or even energy projections, which could then allow us to do the same exercise with greenhouse gas projections for the energy targets. I think that would be a really useful exercise for us. As I see time is going quickly, I need to get through 3 more points. Timing and administrative overlap is not just about content, it's also about how we undertake the governance framework. And I think it's been mentioned already that there are some issues with the timings and we need to reduce bottlenecks. I'll get on to more of that in my second intervention, but for now, I think one of the key aspects is in the NECPs, we have essentially additional data sets of greenhouse gas projections, for example. It's a very simple example, but it means now that the centralized data set that we have at the agency and we utilize for a lot of our analytical tools is now not usable. As has been mentioned, all of the data is in PDFs. So the exercise to get this data is not so simple, and we have a tool available via ReportNet that can essentially streamline this process. So we think this is one way, and again, I'll discuss digitalization a bit more in my next intervention, but again, aligning a bit the timings and administrative overlap would ease a bit the burden here and also give us better quality, consistency, and relevancy of data sets, and then therefore more transparency. One very key part, which was mentioned at the very beginning on implementation, I hope this links quite nicely to that, is that we need to improve our understanding of policies and their implementation. I mentioned previously that we're collecting the Integrated National Climate and Energy Policies and Measures database, which you can access via our website. Currently, we're lacking a lot of data on impacts and costs of the policies. So we have a very big comprehensive list of over 3,000 policies, but we don't know actually what these are achieving on the ground in a really detailed way. Only 15% of the over 3,000 policies have at least one data point linked to some kind of impact and or cost. So for us to really understand what are the cost-effective actions, we need that data. And we need that data because then we can share, as us in our IONET network, but also at the Commission and between the different countries, what are the key actions that can be leveraged to then achieve the most cost-effective reduction to achieve our targets. I think that's very crucial. And also then share these at the international level and be a globe setter. Finally, also very quickly on additional data needs, it's maybe the less interesting topic when we're discussing also reduction of administrative burden, but I think there are additional data needs. I think finance investment is one key point. Again, there is a section in the NECPs, but it's not very standardized or harmonized by member states in how they report. Possibly some data that's very well integrated into current reporting practices could be quite useful there. And that would be a great complementary signal for future impacts and where we anticipate future impacts and implementation. But also it's a great signal for private actors and financial undertakings. So I leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, William, for sharing your views on, I mean, you have hands-on experience in going through all these plans and pinpointing what you find most useful and also the areas for improvement. Thank you so much. And I will now like to move to Mrs. Cornelia Marfield from the Climate Action Network, Europe, Cannes. So you are the head of unit at Cannes Europe, and you have a tremendous experience in energy trade and investment policy. And from that perspective, could you share with us how this regulation on the governance has helped to reach the EU-level targets and has made energy and climate policy more transparent?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question and the invitation. So also just to say that Cannes Europe actually has a project with partners in 12 member states to in-depth monitor and assess the NECPs. So we have also published multiple reports on the draft NECPs and also given some recommendation on how to improve the governance regulation. So certainly we see a lot of positives, some were already named, so we think it's important that there is some kind of minimum standard in terms of climate governance that all member states need to follow. Of course, I also hear the Netherlands and Denmark saying we have those processes nationally, and it's great that we have the first in class here on the panel, but then there are also a lot of other member states, and I think it's also important to acknowledge it's good to have some common standards that everyone needs to follow. Secondly, it's of course important to have this integrated planning of climate and energy policy together. Again, I would also agree with Mr. Klisovic that certain elements can be strengthened, including the coherence with the economic policies, and also what William adhered to with the just transition aspects, which are becoming ever more important and are the forefront of political thinking. And we really have to ensure that the climate and energy targets implementation is very strongly linked to ensure that people can equally benefit from the energy transition. So also the tool gives us a bit more of a better understanding whether the targets are reached. And of course here the ongoing exercise of the NECP drafting has also already showed us that this is not the case. What has currently been put forward by member states does not add up to reach any of the climate or energy targets, and this is of course very concerning. So the key recommendation that we would have is to look at enforcement and compliance, both in terms of the process for drafting the plans, but also in terms of the substance and quality of those plans. So in terms of the process, we are in the middle of the ongoing NECP cycle, and we have already seen that unfortunately a lot of member states were late in submitting their drafts, and we still need to see how many will actually be there of the final NECPs at the end of this month. So what is really important here to see, and that was also a point already raised by my Danish panel colleague here, is that there could be penalties for late or incomplete submissions. And also, of course, that the Commission makes use of their options to also start infringement procedures against countries that do not deliver their final NECPs on time and at quality. Same goes for the national long-term strategies, which were not raised so much so far, but I would also like to highlight that at the moment the updates are to be done every 5 years are just on a voluntary level where necessary, and I think we can all agree here that after 5 years, in particular the last 5 years of energy policy upheavals, it is absolutely necessary that member states update their national long-term strategies. So we really hope the Commission will urge all member states to have them ready by the 1st of January next year. There is also an important missing compliance tool that ought to be added, which is a provision that would grant access to justice at the national level should member states not comply with the governance regulation. In that case, it's really important that citizens at the national level have the right to challenge their governments over such gaps and have an additional way to basically force them to do enough to reach the EU targets, but also achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement. My second point would be on the substance. The delivery gap filling mechanism needs to be strengthened. So obviously part of or one of the main objectives basically of the planning exercise is to ensure that the EU-wide targets are really fulfilled. And the experience here with the 2020 targets was unfortunately that the delivery gap filling mechanism didn't work in all cases. So in 2021 we saw that 4 EU member states were below their trajectories for the 2020 renewable energy targets, and even more concerning. The State of the Union report 2022 also stated that 10 member states failed to meet their energy savings obligations for 2020. So this is really concerning at all that it is happening. I think the functioning of the delivery gap mechanism must really be looked into, so that targets are not underachieved, so well before they're underachieved. Much quicker intervention here is needed to ensure that member states are on a national trajectory. To ensure that also more transparency is needed, what steps the Commission is taking when they see that certain gaps are remaining, so that also stakeholders from civil society like us can interfere and also use their tools available to ensure more ambition on the national level. With regards to energy savings, a new mechanism was also introduced with the EED that goes in the right direction with the ambition gap and gap filling mechanisms that brought some improvements and are there to ensure that the EU final energy consumption target is achieved. However, these mechanisms currently only apply for final energy consumption and should really be extended also to primary energy consumption.
Sorry, Cornelia, could you conclude?
Yes,
please?
yeah, I actually only have 1 point left. So, since you also asked about transparency, we also had a report that looked at, that analyzed how these 12 member states in which we are operating with our project are actually making data available, and we saw some severe gaps there. So it's really important to improve the data availability, consistency and transparency at the national level to ensure that scrutiny and also public participation, both in the drafting and then also in the assessment of the national progress reports is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and sorry for having put pressure on you, but time is running. And I would like now to give the floor to our last speaker, Vasiliki Klonari. You have a long-standing experience as well in the energy sector, and you lead the Energy System Integration Unit at Wind Europe. So to you, I have one question. How the governance regulation has been helping in providing a stable framework for green investments, and do you see any need for further elements in order to trigger to give the right investment signals? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, Wind Europe is the European Trade Association for wind energy in Europe, for the ones who don't know us. And I would like to mention two things that have been major drivers for investments in wind energy. I think it's a bit more than credibility in the national energy and climate plans. It's actually long-term commitment and long-term market visibility, which are both extremely important for investments in wind farms. So wind farms are assets that require a high initial capex investment, and they have a relatively long payback time of around 15 to 20 years. So this stability and long-term visibility are crucial. The second point has already been mentioned, is actually having common templates, just having common ground to compare how the different countries do. So, of course, these templates can be improved. They can be more user-friendly, maybe better than just PDFs. But still, the fact that investors can use these templates to compare how the different markets are doing and to take decisions has really helped a lot. And if you just see a graph showing investments, total investments in wind energy, onshore and offshore from, say, 2017 to 2023, after 2019, investments actually double. So it's very visual. I wish I had the slide with me just to show you this. But also if we look into specific good practices from clear electrification targets, like in Spain, the PPA sector is booming. Not only because of this, but also thanks to this. countries having clear strategies also in their NECPs on supply chain for green investments and manufacturing. They're pioneers in building wind turbines like Denmark and Spain. And countries who have provided granularity in their NECPs about auction design, auction schedules are pioneers in deployment. So it's really very direct, the impact. So when it comes to the governance regulation, we think that as it stands now, it has all the major elements that are needed. It is actually all the frameworks adequately reflected. We do not think that it should be revised, it needs to be revised. We think that now everything is about implementation, now continuing to the second cycle, and of course to use the experience we have from the first cycle. And here I would like to mention 3 points. The first is about improving granularity on certain policies and actually aligning with other policies that are key, infrastructure policies, industrial policies, because this will actually allow to have a more efficient monitoring. The second point is about reinforced coordination between the European, regional and national level when it comes to stakeholder engagement, but also when it comes to just to plans. Yeah? If the plans are actually well aligned and how this can be monitored. So this really needs to be looked at, but for us it's really an implementation exercise. And the third point is about reinforced monitoring and the user-friendliness of reporting will actually help a lot. I will stop here, and then in the next part, I will give some practical examples on how we think this could be improved in implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vasiliki. Very happy to have the views of the industry, how you see the usefulness of the governance and of the plans, which is very complementary to what we have heard from the member state side. So thank you very much. And before passing to the second round of interventions, I see that we have a question in the Slido. I don't know if you can all read. Sorry.
I don't have a question, but I would like to comment on what we heard from other panelists.
Let me just address it, otherwise colleagues will refrain from using Slido. So I would like to, I think you all see this question. It is related to the role of electricity distribution grids. And Rosa Natri says that it's very limited in the current governance regulation when it comes to NECPs. And I mean, seeing the work that has been recently done, notably at the Council, with the Council conclusions last May on the grids, how you see the grids' role in the NECPs. Here, I would like to invite the representative from Denmark and from the Netherlands, if you would like to give brief comments to the question that was in the slide. You from the member state perspective. Thank you. Yeah, there's just one. Huh? Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Right. I think it's definitely an interesting perspective. I think from our side, it sort of relates to the whole idea of, okay, well, how do we simplify this? How do we make it more harmonized? Because actually we already have a pretty good overview of like cross-border transmission networks, for instance. What do we plan in the next 10 years? Why not include distribution as well, and why not include these plans and integrate them more in the NECP piece? I don't think necessarily that each country should provide this complete overview, but I do think it would make perfect sense for the NECPs to integrate plans that are already and data that already exists out there. Why not put it all in one place? I think that's an interesting perspective, because the data is out there. We should just make the best use of it, and that also includes distribution, because we don't get to, when we talk transmission, we also need to talk distribution.
Yeah, I think I agree. I'm not really in favor of putting all the information available from regional operators or even local climate policies for that matter. It would make it even harder to read. But I do agree with linking and use it as a framework to dive deeper and deeper when you want to. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You wanted to intervene? Yes? Thank you.
Yes,
Briefly,
but I wanted to comment on what we have heard. Our Danish colleague said that NECPs, you see it as a reporting tool. We see it completely different at the local level. We see it as a policy tool. If it's a reporting tool, it means it will report on us, what we do at the local level, since we implement 80% of the NECPs. But we see it as a policy tool. As I said, we need a cohesion tool to reconcile different policies. And that's NECP. That's how we see it. As one document, action plan, what we should do and what we should implement. Otherwise, we would be in a position to implement different policies and we will not break silos among them. So that's how we see NECP as a long-term commitment of governments. I agree, Vasiliki. And the second comment, you said that the report on the governance regulations should be for the next commission. I think, yeah, no, that's then.
No, an eventual revision, legal revision.
But report should be.
No, report I said will come, I mean, over the next month.
Yeah.
Should be before the summer break, yes, of course. Yeah. Thank you so much for being brief. We have two other questions in the Slido. I'll leave this for afterwards. Let's kickstart with the second round of interventions. In here, I'm going to change a little bit the format. So there will be, you'll be two responding to the same question, and I would appreciate if you could be brief, because we have basically half an hour to close the event. So because we will be kicked out of the room, otherwise we'll stay here until late. So here I would like to start with you, Mr. Klisovic and Mrs. Klonari. And here I would like to ask you the following. How, in your view, can we translate the plans, the reports, and the assessments into concrete action and investments on the ground? How can we ensure that the EU and member states live up to their ambitions, I mean, the targets, objectives, basically the legislation that they agreed when negotiating with the Parliament and the Commission? Please. You can start, yes, but if you don't mind, really brief, otherwise we don't have time.
I will tell you, a month ago, I organized, as a member of the Committee of the Regions in Zagreb, my city, international conference on energy transition and climate change. And there was a two-day conference. First day, we have a citizens' assembly, local dialogue with the citizens. And citizens told us that they want to see concrete projects. They are not interested in a complex European, national or local political procedures when we design the policies, set the targets, whatever. They want to see projects. So answer to your question is projects. More projects means implementation, means that we stick to our words. And for implementation of these projects, what do we need? At least at the local level, we need skillful personnel. So we don't have it enough in all the cities. So investing in skills, reskills, upskills, all these famous words, it's important. And then we need money as well. And not just the public money, it won't be enough. What we need is a private money as well. So we need a license to use private money to attract, to use public money to attract private money. This is very important for us because we know how business thinks. They need to have bankable, for example, business case, so that they can have a loan in bank as well as some subsidies from the state. What we need is kind of a financial mix, economic incentives like grants or loans or something, then fiscal incentives, some tax deductions or subsidies or something, and then have that kind of a public-private partnership where we can use public money to attract private investments, and then we go with projects. So projects are key for implementation, and that's key to stick to our commitments, which we undertook under different documents. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if I may, to add to what you just said, not only public money to trigger private money, but also very good national energy and climate plans, because as we heard, these are a proof of commitment and transparency and long-term previsibility of member states' intentions. And I'll give you the floor also to answer this question, please.
Thank you. So I would like to mention some ways that we see for better implementation of the regulation. The first is about granularity that I mentioned before, where, as I said, some of the key elements in the NECP should be more explained, more detailed by the member states. And this can be driven, the way to do it can be driven by the European Commission recommendation on the final submitted NECP. So this is a very fit-for-purpose framework to actually give guidance at European level on how to do it, especially when it comes to projects and budget decided at national level. So national grid reinforcement, national dismantling of infrastructure or national industrial policy. This is where transparency and details are missing, and where we really need to take a closer look for implementing the regulation. Regarding the reinforced coordination between national, regional and European level, a way to do it could be to reinforce, to revitalize groups, such as the high-level groups that are in that come from the 10E regulation, or something similar to enable better exchange, better regular exchange, and simply to organize workshops between policymakers at European level with direct participation by national authorities and industry representatives and civil society. So just to enable this regular exchange and comparison of practices. And the third point about the efficient monitoring that I mentioned before and efficient stakeholder engagement, for instance, for that we see a reinforced role for ACER or other agencies. In our view overall is that we don't need new rules, we do not need new templates, we cannot afford losing time to revise another regulation. So now it's really about efficient ways and smart ways to implement. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your interesting replies and reinforcing some of the ideas you had already offered before. I would like now to turn to Julie Eriksson and Cornelia Manfield. I mean, could you, you have very good ideas, you have already put forward some of those, but in your view, how can we ensure that the energy and climate governance can really be future-proof and flexible? We have heard that it's fit for purpose just now from Wind Europe, but how can we make sure that it is really future-proof and also flexible? We have seen in these last 5 years that a lot has changed in the energy sector. A lot is changing still. We are in a changing world. So to make it fit for 2040, for 2050, independent also of political landscape. You've just had elections this weekend with some changes in various member states. So in your view, how can we make this future-proof? Thank you.
Thanks. So I think I probably touched upon a lot of ideas in my first intervention, but I think from our side, it's important to be forward-looking, and I probably drilled that down a couple of times already. But I do think we will eventually be faced with the question about how do we go beyond the 42.5% renewable energy? How do we go beyond 45%? What other measures should we look into rather than keep reporting on the same sub-targets for all eternity? I think it's healthy to have a look at that and also be clear about what is necessary. I do believe there are some elements of the NECP and the reporting that are very necessary, also some that are more nice too. And that I think we should. I think it's good to have more data. I think it's good to have more granular data. I don't necessarily think it is important to have long explanations about every little policy that have been implemented over the last 5 years. And also maybe think about the format. There are a lot of weird PDFs on the website, and ours is probably one of them. So have a look at how do we set this up in a more accessible and clear-cut way so we get the data that we need. And yeah, I agree that probably we view this differently than other stakeholders, other member states. So it's also important to be clear about public participation. I think in our case, because we have all these national elements, stakeholders risk getting disappointed if they don't react before the NECP. Because we have all these national policies and hearings that lead up to it. And then we also have the hearing, of course, of the NECP itself. So I think, yeah, have a look at how do we make it more flexible? What are the key aspects that need to be reported on? And what are we trying to achieve? I think some reporting obligations are achieved elsewhere, and we can do those links, for instance, to the ONDPs and the NDPs and so on. So create those links and just be clear and concise. Yeah.
Yes, well, I mean, I would say that climate and energy governance is future-proof if it helps us to avoid climate meltdown. That's the whole purpose of the exercise, that we ensure that we rapidly phase out fossil fuels, and that just means speed up the deployment of renewables and ensure that we have very ambitious energy savings. So from my perspective, it's really important that we strengthen the governance regulation as it already is. And in the speech earlier, I made some recommendations regarding the enforcement and compliance mechanisms that should be looked into. And in particular, also to address actually the second question in the Slido, if I may, because it links quite well. Yes, we do need binding targets. It would really help to also have the national contributions at the binding level, so that the Commission can actually ensure that every member state does their bit. And this is currently not the case. Also, we don't have a binding primary energy consumption target. So I think this is something that we need to look into. But overall, I think for the post-2030 energy policy framework, it's important to stress that the duality of the renewable energy target and energy efficiency targets is essential to maintain. And I would also like the opportunity to say, please do not give in to the nuclear lobby. Hands off the renewable energy target that absolutely is essential and must be maintained.
Thank you very much for interventions. Allow me one clarification. When you mentioned the public stakeholder participation, just in the national obligation, yes, the NECP envisages that member states have to consult stakeholders on the plans before they are submitted. They are finalized first and submitted. So just a precision. In relation to your comments on the nature of the targets, well, the Fit for 55 policy framework is set. It has established EU-level targets for both renewables and energy efficiency with the national contributions. And if I may, I think that in this context, I mean, this context makes it the plans and the monitoring of the implementation of the plans even more important, I would say, to follow up on what member states are doing. I would like now to give the floor to the two last speakers, and so William Killing and Martin Vernog. And here to you, I'd like to hear you. What, in your view, we should do to simplify, because a lot of calls are made for us, including was let's say, a commitment from our president last year in the parliament in September that we would rationalize and simplify and reduce the burden on, especially on companies and organizations, not precisely on member states, but even though, what do you think we should do to simplify and rationalize the processes and requirements of the energy and climate governance, while of course not compromising ambition and delivery? Yeah? So do you have any ideas there? Because we need ideas there. Thank you.
Okay, now I think it's working. Good. Yes, so I think the last part is key, and also what the interventions from Wind Europe and Core were also intervening, that we don't necessarily want to change what's already working. I think that's really the key part, that a lot of the framework is there, a lot of the framework is very useful for several different stakeholders, and the point of everything I say after this isn't to say that this should necessarily change in content, but maybe the process of how we get that information and how we disseminate it, also going back to some of Martijn's comments. I think is very important. So I think one of the key parts is a review and rationalization of the current framework to ensure that we have all the key parts for all the key parts. And here I'm talking mainly about targets. So if we have all the key targets, do we have the key monitoring framework to essentially guide us and understand the progress towards those targets? Do we have, for example, information on the trajectories at the national level to get to these targets? Before it was referenced, electrification targets could be a really useful asset to have. They're included in most of the NECPs, but not all, and they're reported in the NECPs, not in a more easily disseminable product. Beyond this, again, I've mentioned previously the greenhouse gas projections as an important tool. Energy projections could be a similarly very valuable tool for the broader monitoring and understanding of achieving our energy targets. One of the key parts, I think, in simplifying, and I've mentioned it before and I'm hinting at it now, is digitalization. I think that's really a key process. The EEA is, and now also DG Energy is running surveying tools that the member states can fill in. They're not always perfect, we know, but we think they are, in the whole value chain of knowledge production, really reducing the admin burden on getting the key data in, making it as easily accessible as possible to general stakeholders. And I think that's very important. It can allow also to create much clearer expectations on what should be required in the reported data, because you have a more simplified view rather than a more qualitative open interpretation with clear methodologies behind them as well. It can also allow, and I see the second question on the list, I think it can address that a little bit, not on the more sanctioning or rejection of reporting, but quality assurance is a really key part that the EA manages of data sets. And that's a really key part where we can discuss already with member states whether the reporting from our perspective is fully complete or not. So I think with digital formats, it's much easier to do automated quality checking as well as manual quality checking. I mentioned it's much easier to disseminate more complex data sets, either as a tabular data set itself, as geospatial data, or as data visualizations. And on that last point, it can also then mean that we can have progress trackers, which are readily available on the website, and with the click of a button, we can update all of the data every year. So in the long run, it's really going to help a lot, I think. What I would then focus is that from this point of view, complex data should be done in the easiest format possible via digital processes, whereas maybe more qualitative strategic aspects could then be done via the NECP, which could also be pre-filled with the data from digital components. So I think this is really a key aspect where digitalization can really reduce admin burden without actually changing the content necessarily of the key documents that are usable by stakeholders. One very important part as well to mention is the improving and standardizing of timelines. A lot of the reporting originally, particularly from the greenhouse gas emissions and reduction side, I mean, this was really focused because of the UNFCCC level and the reporting that's undertaken there. So I think a key problem we have now is the disjointed nature of the UNFCCC reporting with the EU level reporting, thanks to the Katowice discussions and the changement of reporting date. So I think an alignment of reporting to make sure EU data comes in to perfectly feed into the UN level is also a key aspect, so we're not then having to do additional reporting exercises to catch up. And again, within this discussion of timelines, having official legally binding quality assurance procedures to ensure that the data is being kept to the highest standard, I think is also key, not only for the data itself, but also then for external stakeholders who maybe aren't aware of the procedures ongoing and can also critique and comment. And on this point, one thing regarding the digitalization of transparency, if of course you have issues accessing data, please reach out to me and let me know, because this is one of our jobs, to give the data to the public as best as possible. And we rely on your feedback to understand how best to do that.
Well, I'm having a tough job adding anything to this, but I like many of your things. I agree much of them as well. I also heard many thoughts on what is needed. I think that it's a good way to look at things. We at an agency were filling in the templates, and we're actually have little idea on is the data also relevant for investors and stakeholders. So it's good to have that feedback, and I think we should be learn from that and possibly do better. I'm not saying revise everything, but maybe we could enhance it and improve it to better fit the needs. I mean, that's also if you want to be flexible. I mean, the world keeps changing. It does not stick to the assumptions we made in our plan. So that, and to some extent, that also applies to the reporting itself. And one thing I would like to point out here is that, and that also relates to speeding up and achieving 2030 targets, is to consider also to track progress, but looking at not at energy consumption and renewable energy, how many gigawatts do we have from this and that, but look at the enabling conditions and trying to monitor that a bit more closely, as those are really the buttons policymakers have impact on, and can try to influence. And I'm talking here about having the regulatory framework in place to allow for new markets to emerge, or having the knowledge where which is needed for parties to make the right decisions. Infrastructure, I mean, those are less clear and not always very visible in the format, but I think when you try to monitor that, it provides policymakers a more direct feedback on whether or not the policy is doing its job as it was assumed during its development. And that could speed up things quite a bit, I think. And I want to reiterate the need for alignment with international reporting and also climate mechanisms. It's also about target setting. It's very much related to the monitoring and reporting, I think. So whatever we come up with in our updated EU NDC, or what is being agreed upon on Article 6 in the climate negotiations, that is for trading of emission reductions. How are we going to place emissions trading in an international context within the EU? I mean, at the moment it has a small place, but it does occur, and some member states are considering it or are going to do it. How does it fit in all that? And so we have to prepare for that, also in our reporting and accounting, and so that's something we should closely follow, I think. And to conclude, I mean, there's a window of opportunity for revising the governance regulation, but also the rule book of the reporting under the Paris Agreement, which should occur not later than 2028. So it would be good to keep that in mind. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I see that in the meantime we received several questions. I would perhaps just pick up one of those, given the time, and I would start by answering it myself, but of course if you'd like to step in, please do. It relates to the PPAs and the fact that not all NECPs even mention PPAs. Here I would like to say one thing. For the moment we have not yet received any final energy NECP, so any final NECP, so it's a bit premature to conclude that there is nothing on PPAs. Second thing is, and also related to a previous comment on the huge delays by some member member states to submit their draft NECPs. We absolutely agree. It was also impacting negatively on the assessment by the Commission, but part of it we understood in a way because a great deal of legislation was still being discussed by the co-legislators, and so these were missing elements that were fundamental for the revision of the plans. So these excuses do not exist anymore. So let's see how member states perform with the final NECPs. But I would just like to leave that message. We have not yet seen the final plan, so let's see what comes, and the Commission in the assessment of the final plans will be as accurate and detailed as we were for the draft plans. Please shout, panel, if you would like to say anything else. Otherwise, I will just wrap up and conclude.
Just a very short answer to the last question, if I see it. Impact of far right on the policy in this area, I don't think that it will be a great impact. Although Greens and Liberals did poorly at these elections, but there will be enough to form the European Commission. So EPP, who does well, and the S&D as well. So I think we won't have a major impact, negative impact on these policies coming from the far right. Thank you.
If I may add to that, as we could see also by listening to Can Europe, the Commission was not the only institution assessing the plans. A lot of organizations did so, and there is a huge scrutiny by citizens, by various stakeholders and groups. So there is a lot of pressure, including peer pressure from other member states. So this is also very important, and again, this is thanks to the transparency that this exercise gives on energy policy. Thank you so much. Oh, you want to intervene, sorry.
I would like to react to the question about the PPAs by Annie Scanlan. So I think this has to do very much with the granularity and coordination between the national and EU level. So member states in their NECPs should have a clear strategies on electrification and how they're contributing to the European targets, and actually with which mechanisms they will do it. And of course, PPAs is one of the top mechanisms to do it. So this is, when I talked about granularity, this is exactly how it could be mentioned, for instance. Yeah.
Very good, very good. You could give a concrete example to what you were just saying before. Thank you so much. So we come to the end. Just allow me just to draw. We heard many things. I'm not going to replicate everything that was said. I just selected 5-6 points that I think you all agreed around this table. First of all, I mean, no doubt you have mentioned the great value of the governance regulation, and be it because it is a reflection of the commitment of member states, of policy credibility, transparency. It enables comparability between the various member states, enables also to look for synergies at regional level, and it's key information in order to attract the investment. We heard this. We also heard about the importance of granularity you just mentioned. We also heard that the governance, in relation to the revision of the governance regulation, that, I mean, most of you agree that all is there, but of course one has to be flexible and look first and foremost now at implementation. A great deal of legislation has been agreed and put in place up to now, the last 5 years. They need absolutely to be implemented. So let's look at implementation first, and not touch on things that we see work well, but then, of course, adapt it for the post-2030, let's say, framework. We also heard ideas how to simplify some of this work, notably when it comes to the reporting, issues related to data, the digitalization. It can further help member states and also the Commission in this work. And then, as a fifth point, look at ways how best to responsibilize member states. Here we can look at the legal instruments that we have. at EU level, but also other means. We heard about sanctions. We don't like too much this word sanctions. Perhaps you would like to refer instead to conditionality, which is, by the way, linked to a question that is in the slide on the link to the RRPs. It's pretty much that, the conditionality. You do what is in the plan, you receive the cash. Okay, here the cash is not there, but other things are there. And here, just my last point. So not look only at targets. These are important because give the direction and keep member states on track. Figures are important for that, but also and look pretty much on the actions, the policies and measures, what you call the enabling conditions, so the policies and measures to have a good track of those, so not track only how member states are performing in relation to targets. That's very important, is there, but also have a close eye to the policies and measures that will then enable member states to get to those targets. And with this, I'll finish. Thank you so much for your presence, to all our audience, and a particular thanks to the 6 of you. Very good to have you with us today. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
All right.
Good.